Hello. Today General Hospital will interesting details on Wednesday, March 26, 2025. First, Rick sat silently, listening as Ava, still shaken, recounted the events that had just unfolded. She could barely maintain her composure, her eyes darting around the room as if expecting something terrible to happen at any moment. Instead of the sharpness and confidence she usually exuded, Ava now felt like a woman haunted by what she had just endured, an experience that left her feeling helpless and out of control. Trying to steady her breathing, Ava described Kristina, not the woman they both knew, but a completely unfamiliar version, filled with rage and reckless abandon. She told Rick about their encounter in the dimly lit garage, how the tense confrontation quickly spiraled into a terrifying display of anger. Kristina had accelerated her car straight at Ava, her eyes burning with hatred, completely devoid of reason. Ava had no choice but to run, her feet pounding against the cold concrete floor, every instinct driving her to survive. What terrified Ava even more wasn't the fact that she narrowly escaped, but the thought that Kristina might have hurt someone else in her rampage. As she fled, the sound of crashing metal behind her echoed in her mind, a haunting reminder that things could be far worse than she realized. As Rick listened to every detail, he grew increasingly tense. To him, this wasn't just a personal argument gone wrong. Kristina's behavior had crossed a line, and if Ava's account was accurate, the consequences could be far more serious than anyone had anticipated. He advised Ava to lay low and avoid any further confrontation until they could fully understand what had happened. His voice was calm but firm, laced with concern that went beyond the legal implications. Kristina wasn't just unstable, she was dangerous. Rick insisted that Ava go to Sonny and tell him everything before the situation escalated any further. However, Ava wasn't comforted by the suggestion. She knew how deeply Sonny loved his daughter, and involving him might complicate everything even more. Still, she couldn't deny that Rick was right, something had to be done, and fast. The image of Kristina's furious, unrecognizable face kept playing over and over in her mind. Ava felt as though she had barely escaped something monstrous. Now, as she faced the aftermath, she couldn't shake the feeling that the true danger might not be over yet. It might only just be beginning. Second, Lulu had been carrying an immense weight for weeks, a truth that gnawed at her conscience relentlessly. She had watched as Brooke Lynn crumbled under the pressure of a secret too heavy to bear, unable to find the courage to tell Dante the truth, that he had a son he had never known about. Despite Lulu's repeated urgings, her voice filled with both frustration and compassion, she knew that this secret could no longer stay hidden. But Brooke Lynn remained paralyzed by guilt and fear, consumed by the decision to give the child up, dreading the devastation that the revelation would cause Dante. For Lulu, the silence grew unbearable, especially whenever she thought of the child, a boy who was deprived of the love and care of his father. The image of that child haunted Lulu daily, like an unshakable shadow. She had stumbled upon the truth by accident, connecting the dots through quiet confessions, small clues, and one gut-wrenching moment when she overheard Brooke Lynn breaking down in tears. At first, Lulu kept the discovery to herself, unsure of how to approach the situation. But the more she thought about it, the more she realized that the child's future depended on someone doing the right thing. She couldn't ignore the sorrow in Brooke Lynn's voice, nor the ache in her own heart. That child had a right to know his father, and Dante deserved to know his son. It was no longer about secrets. It was about doing the right thing, about justice, love, and the possibility of second chances. Determined to act where Brooke Lynn couldn't, Lulu made the decision to confront Dante. Her heart pounded as she stood before him, knowing that the words she was about to speak would forever alter the delicate balance of his world. She told him everything, how she had learned of his connection to Brooke Lynn's child, how the baby had been conceived in a moment they both thought would stay buried in the past, and how Brooke Lynn, overwhelmed and conflicted, chose to give the baby away in secret. Lulu explained the pain she saw in Brooke Lynn's eyes, the lonely fate that awaited the child, and her own moral obligation to step forward. Her voice quivered, but she didn't hold back. It was time for Dante to know the truth. But Dante's reaction wasn't what Lulu had anticipated. Instead of the shock and sorrow she had expected, his face twisted with disbelief. He questioned everything, her intentions, her timing, and even the validity of the information she had given him. It was too overwhelming, too sudden, and perhaps too painful for him to process. He couldn't comprehend the idea that someone he had once trusted could have kept such a life-altering secret from him. The realization that Brooke Lynn had been hiding this truth, and that Lulu had known all along, sent his mind into a whirlwind. Overcome by confusion and raw emotion, he walked out, not looking for answers from Lulu, but from the one person who had remained silent throughout it all. A storm of anger, betrayal, and desperate need for answers drove Dante to seek out Brooke Lynn. His heart raced, every question more urgent than the last. Was it true? Had he really fathered a child? If so, where was his son now? Why hadn't Brooke Lynn told him? As he approached her, he steeled himself for the truth, whether it confirmed Lulu's story or shattered it as a misunderstanding. One thing was certain. From this moment forward, nothing in Dante's life would ever be the same. Third, Jordan had been sensing the growing tension for a while, but now it was time to face the truth head-on. Sitting across from Curtis, she spoke with a calm resolve, her eyes focused as she asked him about the current situation, specifically, what was really happening with Portia and the escalating conflict between him and Drew. Curtis, clearly weighed down by the emotional strain, didn't sugarcoat things. He admitted that the situation had reached a breaking point. Portia was on edge, struggling to sleep, and the pressure was suffocating both of them. The issues with Drew had long since moved past personal conflict. What had started as a disagreement had morphed into a dangerous battle for control, filled with secrets, distrust, and threats that neither of them could handle alone. Curtis shared with Jordan that Drew was in possession of information, details that, if revealed, could destroy everything Portia had worked for and unravel the delicate stability Curtis had fought so hard to protect. He didn't go into specifics, but the meaning was clear. Drew was no longer just a competitor, he had become a real threat to them both. Despite her outward calm, Portia was terrified of what Drew might do next, and Curtis, while resolute in his desire to protect her, knew they were running out of time and options. The more Drew pushed, the more they felt cornered, desperate to keep the damage contained. Listening intently, Jordan's instincts as a former law enforcement officer and strategic thinker kicked in. She had suspected for some time that Drew's recent actions weren't driven by simple business moves or personal vendettas, there was something more to it, something methodical behind his every move. Leaning in, her voice steady and measured, Jordan proposed a bold solution. If Drew was positioning himself as a serious threat, it was time to stop being on the defensive and start being proactive. She suggested an alliance, a quiet and strategic partnership aimed at bringing Drew down before his actions could cause any more harm. It wasn't framed as revenge, it was presented as a calculated move to neutralize a threat before it escalated beyond their control. Curtis paused, torn between his sense of loyalty, his own pride, and the fear of what teaming up with Jordan could mean. Trusting her again would mean opening a door he had locked long ago. But when he looked into her eyes, he saw something clear and unwavering. This wasn't about sentiment, it was about action. She wasn't offering him a favor, she was offering a solution. Deep inside, Curtis knew that he and Portia were running out of options. Drew's next move could turn everything against them, and without help, they stood little chance of holding their ground. Slowly, Curtis nodded, the gravity of his decision settling over him. It was time to stop reacting and start acting. With Jordan's help, he might finally have a shot at outmaneuvering Drew and protecting what mattered most. As they began to outline their plan, an unspoken tension hung between them. It wasn't just the weight of their past that made things complicated, but the realization of what was at stake. This wasn't about pride or power anymore, it was about survival. With their alliance now forged in quiet desperation, the war against Drew had escalated from a private battle to a calculated mission. Jordan, now firmly at the helm, was ready to lead them through it. Fourth, beware, world, Kristina is on a mission, and nothing can stand in her way now. The crushing weight of loss, betrayal, and a truth she refuses to accept has transformed her anger into something far more dangerous. No matter how many defend Ava, no matter how clear the evidence of Ava's innocence, Kristina's rage remains unyielding. To her, justice has yet to be served. The grief over a child she never knew has warped into an all-consuming thirst for vengeance, and Ava has become the sole target of her fury. Kristina's rage had been simmering for days, a storm barely contained beneath the surface. She watched as life moved on for everyone else, as others showed Ava sympathy and gave her space, while Kristina was left drowning in unresolved questions and unbearable pain. The final straw came when she saw Ava alone in the empty, echoing parking garage. Something snapped within her, a scream so deep and primal it demanded release. Without a second thought, she gripped the steering wheel, her vision clouded with fury, and drove toward Ava with deadly intent. Ava didn't see it coming. 1 second, she was reaching for her keys, the next, she was staring into the blinding headlights of a speeding car. The engine roared, drowning out everything around her. Kristina didn't hesitate, didn't waver. Her sole purpose in that moment was to make Ava feel the same pain, the same helplessness that she had felt. In that instant, Kristina became a destructive force, her actions fueled not by reason or sorrow, but by pure, unfiltered emotion. Ava barely managed to escape, diving out of the way just in time as the car barreled past her. The screeching tires and the deafening crash of twisted metal echoed through the garage like a scream in the night. Heart racing, breath sharp, Ava didn't pause to process what had just happened. She ran. Every instinct in her screamed to survive. Yet, even as she fled, a sickening dread settled in her stomach. Had someone else been in the garage? Had Kristina hurt an innocent bystander in her rage? Ava didn't know, and that uncertainty only deepened the fear. Kristina's fight wasn't just against Ava anymore, it was a war against truth, against reality, and against the unbearable pain she refused to confront. And in that moment, she crossed a line from which there was no turning back. The darkness had overtaken her. As the dust settled in the garage, it was clear to anyone witnessing the aftermath, Kristina wasn't seeking justice anymore. She was seeking revenge, and she was ready to destroy anything in her path to achieve it. Finally, Ezra had barely stepped foot in Port Charles, but it was clear he wasn't here to blend in. Dressed in a sharp suit with an effortlessly charming smile, he carried himself with the self-assurance of a man whose political trajectory had already been carefully planned. A rising star in state politics, Ezra had recently formed a strategic alliance with Drew, and it was through that connection that he made his way into the mayor's office. His first official action was to request a private meeting with Laura, under the pretext of introducing himself and learning about the inner workings of Port Charles. Laura, seasoned and sharp, quickly sensed that Ezra's interest in the town went far beyond mere curiosity. There was something about him, an intensity beneath his polished demeanor, a quiet calculation in his eyes that immediately set her on edge. She had dealt with men like him before, ambitious, smart, and always thinking several steps ahead. Their conversation was cordial, even friendly at times, but Laura could feel the subtle undercurrents of a power play. Ezra asked precise questions about city finances, local influence, and political alliances. He listened intently, but it was equally clear he was sizing her up, evaluating her as both a potential ally and a roadblock. Despite Ezra's charm, Laura couldn't shake the feeling that his arrival was part of a grander plan. His swift rise through political circles and his connection to Drew made it evident he was positioning himself for something more, perhaps a run for higher office, or a power shift that would require support from local leaders. Laura remained composed throughout, offering careful, measured responses, aware that any slip could be used against her in the future. Ezra, for his part, seemed to enjoy the back and forth, delivering compliments laced with subtle challenges and flashing smiles that didn't quite reach his eyes. As the meeting concluded, Laura stood with graceful composure, extending her hand. Ezra accepted it with a firm grip. Their exchange had been professional, but as she watched him leave, Laura felt unsettled. There was no mistaking the ambition in his eyes. Ezra wasn't here for a friendly visit, and he certainly wasn't planning to play by anyone else's rules. She knew not to underestimate a man like him. While others might be swayed by his intellect and charm, Laura had honed her instincts over the years, and something about Ezra told her that Port Charles was about to become the battleground for a much larger political struggle. Once alone in her office, Laura gazed out the window, her mind racing. Ezra was a threat, but not in the obvious way. He wasn't the kind of opponent who would strike suddenly. He was the type who moved quietly, methodically, like a storm gathering on the horizon, unnoticed until it was too late. What made him dangerous was his calculated nature and his ability to present himself as a visionary, all while pursuing his own hidden agenda. Laura had faced many challenges in her career, but she knew Ezra would be different, a challenge that would demand caution, strategy, and perhaps even sacrifice. He had arrived, and the game was already in motion.